All right. Just checking to see if we're back up here. It's going to have to be a new stream on certain feeds, but it is what it is. This is what happens when we don't have proper babysitting. Yeah. All right. Well, we're back. Let's see. Are we good? Are we live on all of the outlets? I guess so. Yes, maybe. All right. Well, I'm going to just keep going here. YouTube is definitely a new stream. Let me just throw in a thumbnail there, which is kind of weird. Last episode, YouTube broke up the stream into two videos as well, which is really weird because that didn't happen with the other platforms. None of the other platforms, Rockfin, Rumble, Odyssey, Twitter, none of them created two separate videos. The only one that did was YouTube. So maybe they didn't like something I said and they just took it upon themselves to cut it out or something. Okay. We're back. What were we talking? We were going through a little rampage of Flippies or Flippy updates leading up to this Restaurant Business Online article, which is headlined, Ecolab invests in Miso Robotics, maker of Flippy. So Flippy proper in the headlines, in the news. Cleaning and hygiene giant Ecolab is teaming up with Miso Robotics, the company that makes Flippy, the automated fry cook. The partnership includes a multi-million-dollar growth investment from Ecolab. The two companies will also collaborate on automated cleaning solutions, they said Thursday, though they did not go into detail about what that might look like. Quote, Ecolab's expertise and leadership in water, hygiene, and infection prevention solutions and services are unparalleled, and we look forward to working together to create new value for our customers and the food service industry at large. A lot of value talk coming from all these companies, said Buck Jordan, Miso's founder and chairman, in a statement. See, we're the only ones doing value for I'm not saying we're not the only ones. We are the only people that do value for value who also track Flippy. And we've been tracking Flippy for years. So it's quite possible that Buck Jordan, Miso's founder and chairman, knows about Canary Cry News Talk, at least in terms of the podcast that links to the Flippy stories, and uses Flippy in Flippy update in the whole segment. And here's us talking about value for value, and so they felt compelled. A little value for value rub off on Buck Jordan, although they're not talking about value for value. They're talking about just giving value after being paid. They talk about Miso Robotics, AI-powered arm designed to work with a fryer. It's currently being piloted by a number of fast food chains, including White Castle, Jack in the Box, and Wing Zone. The publicly traded Ecolab offers food safety, hygiene, and cleaning products and services in a variety of industries, including food, hospitality, and healthcare in 170 countries. And if you have never heard of Ecolab, you might recognize the logo. I mean, these guys are humongous. This is the company that I had mistaken earlier and said it was 100 years old. This is the company that's 100 years old, 1923 when it was founded. And it is a corporation headquartered in St. Paul, Minnesota. And they offer services, technology, and systems that specialize in treatment, purification, cleaning, and hygiene of water in a wide variety of applications. So a big deal. This is a big win if you are Miso Robotics, because you have a staple company, a pillar company such as Ecolab partnering and feeding Miso Robotics, almost like they're adopting them as sort of, hey, you guys are bringing us into the future. And so this is a big win. And, we'll hear some thoughts from Basil, hopefully, when he comes back. I would like to hear what his opinions are on this, because obviously this is a big capital flow for Miso Robotics, and we'll probably see some upgraded Flippies, maybe some newer products and services I'm sure everything will be subscription model, like the Sanctuary AI thing, where you kind of just pay monthly to have all the maintenance done for you, to draw that clear line between technocrat and the rest of us peons. So there you go. That's the Flippy update. The most disrupted Flippy update ever, where monitors turned off, the stream shut down. It was just a disaster. But hey, here we are. We're still here. We're still moving forward. No 2-year-old can shut down this show. Oh, I hear them. I hear them outside. I get scared. All right, let's move on here and talk a little bit of mind control.
Mind control weapons.
Mind control research intensifies.
This is from CNN Health. And the headline here is more than 1 in 6 adults have depression as rates rise to rates rise to record levels in the U.S., survey finds. And we won't read the whole article, but just to get a taste, depression is more widespread than ever in the United States, according to a new report from Gallup. About 18% of adults, more than 1 in 6, say they are depressed or receiving treatment for depression, a jump of more than 7 percentage points since 2015, when Gallup first started polling on the topic. Nearly 3 in 10 adults have been clinically diagnosed with depression at some point in their lifetime, according to the survey, which is also a record high. The COVID-19 pandemic took an undeniable toll on mental health. Rates of clinical depression had been rising steadily in the U.S., but jumped notably in recent years, the Gallup data suggests or shows. Quote, the fact that Americans are more depressed and struggling after this time of incredible stress and isolation is perhaps not surprising, said Dr. Rebecca Brendel, president of the American Psychiatric Association, which was not involved in the new research. Quote, there are lingering effects on our health, especially our mental health, from the past 3 years that disrupted everything we knew. Yeah, so dramatic, but also state the obvious there, Dr. Rebecca Brendel. But experts say the awareness around mental health has grown, which could lead to higher rates of diagnosis, and that's not a bad thing. Okay. So it's not a bad thing. It's good. It's good that we're diagnosing it more often, because that means, hey, sure, it means more people are depressed, right? No. It just means we're discovering more people. People are just as depressed as they've ever been, but we're just identifying it now so they can get treatment. Right? Quote, we're making it easier to talk about mental health and looking at it as part of our overall wellness, just like physical health, Brendel said. Quote, people are aware of depression and people are seeking help for it. So it goes on and on here, and it talks about the many forums and the rise in the, let's see, it says here, but as the demand for mental health services rises, the U.S. faces a critical shortage of providers. There it is. That's the big key right there. So they're identifying more. So it's becoming a problem that people are aware of, your mental health, just like your physical health. But we don't have enough providers for care. The U.S. needs more than 8,000 mental health practitioners to fill gaps, according to data from the Health Resource and Services Administration. There are a wide range of treatment options, including support from primary care physicians and workplace benefits. Quote, depression is treatable, Brendel said. The earlier that we seek help, the more effectively and more rapidly it can help get us back on track. End of article. So basically, it creates an open chair. And what's the revolution we're seeing right now? AI. What is the thing that we've been tracking this whole time when it comes to depression, mental health? Well, we have psychedelics on one hand. We have VR on the other hand. And we have the combination coming into fruition as well. Basically technology. So I do believe that this will spring forward a huge leap in using VR technology for mental health. And does a couple things. One, it allows for more brain activity to be recorded, more brain data in general. And secondly, it'll allow the shaping of people's, perceptions and thoughts and therefore emotions. And it's interesting because it's all presented as, hey, it's going to help you. We're going to help you get in a better mental state. And I think there's something to be said about that. But also, how do you know? How do you know that there aren't other effects going on with this? How do we quantify true healing of the mind? That's sort of the, I guess, the $1 million question when it comes to everything regarding psychology. But it's just very interesting that we're headed in this direction, mental health becoming a problem, and people knowing about it, and having a proper treatment that is waiting in the wing in the form of VR headsets, psychedelics, and all these new forms. Pharmakia, basically, getting ready to step in to help all of you feel better emotionally, or at least perceive that you are. And just kind of to piggyback on this whole idea, and it goes hand in hand with depression, because depression, the true sense of depression, it can be debilitating. I have not experienced it myself to a degree where I got diagnosed and seek drugs and help and stuff like that. But I think all people, teenagers especially, not all, many, at least in my generation, I think everybody experienced some form of depression while they were teenagers and in high school and maybe early college days or something. But yeah, it could feel very nihilistic, where it's like, wow, nothing matters. Like, and then as you get into the world, you're like, wow, I don't matter at all. And it can be a very slippery slope. And, especially if you don't believe in God and things of that nature, you can really lose meaning and purpose in life. And that is something that has been pounded into the public consciousness for a while now. But Truth Stream Media, Aaron and Melissa over there, who do great work, continue to do great work, posted this on their Twitter feed. And it's a chart that says postmodern agenda flowchart. And it's got a start circle, and it points to an arrow with a bubble with text in it that says, will the thing that is being widely propagandized and promoted and shoved down everyone's throat every other 5 minutes ultimately result in there being less people on the planet in the future? And then you have two options. One option says yes. And then after the yes, it's that's why. The bubbles go from yes to that's why as an explanation. The other option is not sure. So if you hear that statement and you think, I don't know about that, then that bubble leads to another bubble that says try again, and then it goes back up to the bubble that explains that the thing that's being widely propagandized promoting depopulation. And as a reaction to this chart, I posted in response here, whatever they're doing to my ethnic homeland of Japan seems like the plan for the rest of the world. And we know that there's a Rockefeller influence in the mid-20th century, post-World War II, that really kind of westernized, or this is actually no, before World War II, before World War I actually too, that westernized or began the westernization of Japan. And yeah, we're seeing the results here. I have one screenshot here from an article in April of this year. Japan's population drops by 500,000 in 2022. And then another headline here, inside Japan's long experiment in automated elder care. This was back from January of this year. And then a screenshot of BBC Future Official, where it shows one of these people in Japan who have this problem. It's a hermit issue, literally. And it says in Japan, 500,000 people live as modern day hermits. They are known as hikikomori, recluses who withdraw from all social contact and often don't leave their houses for years at a time. Originally thought to be a problem unique to Japan, cases are popping up all over the world. But what causes it? A common theme is the isolating impact of modern technology, but the direct link is still far from settled. So this is a true thing. This is real. I actually have a cousin who is hikikomori, which means, yeah, he's a recluse. He believe, he never got a job. He just lived at his parents' house. He's like 10 years older than me, so he must be in his 50s now. And yeah, I mean, he was born and raised in this family. He lives at home where he was born. Never had a job. Just just lived off of parents and sister, and just, it's really bizarre. But yeah, and it's a real problem. And it is sort of what technology has provided, but also what society is conditioned. Especially in Japan, there's a real edgy work business culture that causes a lot of suicide and stuff like that. And then one last thing here. Kentucky Fried Chicken for Christmas dinner. This is a thing in Japan. We have Christmas trees and opening boxes and stuff like that. No, in Japan, Christmas is all about having that crispy fried chicken. So yeah, talk about consumerism. And in response, I believe this is probably Mel from Truth Stream Media that posted this. It's a Quartz article. Japan is hoping robot babies will encourage people to have real babies. Oh, yay. And now, what disturbed me about this was not the fact that Japan is rolling out robot babies, hoping that it inspires people to be like, hey, this robot baby is super cool. Let's have a human baby. Clearly, it did not work, because this article is published or was published in December of 2016, which means, 7 years ago? And yes, it did not work, because in 2022, 500,000 people, or population dropped by 500,000 in Japan. So anyway, it's kind of tied into the whole depression thing and the depopulation thing and the eugenics thing. I think it's all part of the same sort of cultural, psychological operation, psychological warfare that's been waged on the public, the mental state of the public at large, and technology that has facilitated it. If you really think about how TV changed society, and then you hyperdrive that with smartphones. Yeah. I mean, those of you listening probably know, but the concept of disinformation even being a thing, a topic, is sort of ridiculous if you think about how anybody can create a message to anyone using the internet and these devices and this technology. So it really is important to think about what your message is, when you're out there. So there you go. Pray for the people. They are suffering. The people are having mental issues. This is a known fact, but it is also part of the societal conditioning that has taken place with the use and distribution of technology, which is leading to not just a lot of depressed people, but a generation willing to transform. Of course, we live in a world where Jared Kushner said this.
My generation is, hopefully with the advances in science, the first generation to live forever, or the last generation that's going to die.
Changes to the human being. The Washington Times headline, Building a Superhuman. Focus on mind, body, soul drives evolution of America's war fighters. What is this, a face like the sun video? What are we Washington Times? Okay. All right, let's see what they have to say. Tampa, Florida. Promises of transformative military technology were around every corner at the Special Operations Forces Conference, but few compared to the idea of upgrading human beings themselves. Quote, I think that's the future. It's getting there where we're going to be able to create superhumans, end quote. Alex Guerrero, the medical practitioner best known for his work on the TB12 method with legendary NFL quarterback Tom Brady, told the Special Ops Forces Week audience here. It may sound like science fiction, but Mr. Guerrero's declaration dovetails with a multi-pronged effort inside the U.S. Armed Forces to usher in the next phase of evolution for America's warfighters. I think it's sneaky that they're even using the word evolution here, because we know in the context of transhumanism, evolution is something that is harnessed with the advancement of science and technology. So I know they're trying to say, oh yeah, we're just evolving the idea of a military, just an armed forces in general in the U.S. But yeah, go ahead and integrate that language there, Washington Times. From biomechanics to mental health, from psychological toughness to spiritual awakening. Military leaders are fully embracing the idea of nurturing the mind, body, and soul in concert to create warriors fully equipped for the conflicts of the 21st century, both on the battlefield and inside one's own mind. Talk about this new warfare, physical battlefield, but also this sort of mental warfare, which is tied into the spiritual warfare. Man, if this isn't Days of Noah end times kind of stuff, I don't know what's going to convince you. Mr. Guerrero's concept of superhumans hinges on culturing the microbiomes of elite athletes or other prime specimens, and quite literally incorporating them into other humans' makeup. Such a radical step could, in theory, upgrade the strength, speed, physical endurance, and recovery time for otherwise average individuals, using cutting-edge science to build more capable men and women. Whew. All right, we're here. For the Pentagon, that's the extreme end of a rather wide spectrum, and one that's not ready to implement on a significant scale, at least publicly. But military leaders already have embraced the broader idea of optimal human performance. No longer is the focus only on how high soldiers can jump, how fast they can run, or how quickly they're able to solve problems in a high-stakes environment. Case in point, Air Force Major General Michael Martin, commander of U.S. Special Operations Command Korea, said the most important factor in ensuring that his elite unit is ready for potential war with North Korea is the mental toughness, physical fitness, and emotional health of his personnel are all in top form. Quote, "The gunship is a great platform, but it's not worth its weight in gold unless the crew is full up, i.e. cognitively, preservation of forces and family, all the pillars for us to be high-functioning military members," General Martin told the Washington Times in an exclusive interview. And later, I'm going to skip down here. Marrying man and machine. I thought this was just science fiction. But no. Deep inside the Pentagon, there's been a subtle shift in how best to use technology to aid America's warfighters. Oh, has there now? Really? Oh, I thought that was all just crazy conspiracy theory. I thought it was just some Alex Jones talk, But apparently not.
They've been creating animal-human hybrids for decades.
Yeah, he said it. It's all coming true. Alex Jones is right. Hashtag. The best, most advanced equipment has long been part of U.S. military might, but the focus increasingly is turning to not just how humans can use that technology, but how the two can operate together in an almost symbiotic manner to create capabilities far beyond what people can accomplish on their own. Perhaps no program better exemplifies the approach than the military's Hyper-Enabled Operator Initiative. Hyper-Enabled Operator. The offshoot of an ill-fated effort to build a futuristic suit similar to Marvel superhero Iron Man's famed battle gear. Yeah, I remember that. They tried to make the Iron Man suit, and it failed. So what do? The suit itself failed to meet some of its lofty expectations, but the technological aims of that program are moving full steam ahead. Of course it is. Officials describe a future in which Special Forces personnel are outfitted with a range of technologies that can compile and analyze mountains of data, including information collected from commercially available sources or through social media channels. Can you imagine some superhuman military guy looks at you and then, in their little scanner, they do a whole search history of your social media posts and they do a profiling of you right then and there. And then they're getting all that info in their little brain chip. Man, that is just like, that's crazy. Like the whole idea of, finding out about somebody or meeting someone and then, like, oh, I'm going to go Google their name, but just instantaneous, and then making decisions based on the gathering of the data or the presenting of what, the data collects and generates. With all of that data available to them in real time, military personnel may be able to find and identify threats without ever laying physical eyes on them. Oh, you don't even have to look at them. You just know. You can be in a room and be like, I smell an IP address over there who once posted about guns. He's a threat. Take him down. Quote, we want this operator to be super users of their environment across multiple domains, so they're a little bit able to see around corners. Army Colonel Jarrett Matthews, director of the Joint Acquisition Task Force at U.S. Special Ops Command, said during a presentation at the Special Forces Conference here. Okay, so they're in multiple domains. So they're in the physical world, but they're also in what? The spiritual dimension? What are we talking? What domains are you talking about? Are you in space? Are you in water? It truly is kind of like a superhero thing, right? You can kind of go in water, hang out with the mermen, the mer people, make some deals with them, and go out into space, quote unquote, and deal with the moon people. Yeah, it's good times. This is good. In a wartime environment, Colonel Matthews said the hyper-enabled operator system can translate road signs, graffiti, and other messages from foreign languages to English or whatever language the operator wants. Oh, wow. This is like super Tower of Babel here. Such a tool could be vital in battles in a foreign land. What's more, officials say the system will ultimately be able to understand and respond to the user just as a human would, helping to solve problems and gather necessary information in a matter of seconds. Then they get into mind and soul. Building better soldiers with the aid of modern equipment is just one part of the equation. What's arguably even more important, officials say, is caring for the emotional and psychological well-being of warfighters. Man, talk about, look, I never subscribe to the idea that video games, make people violent or, I don't think that's true per se. And I think even studies have shown that. I know it's a narrative out there. But there is something to be said about this psychology, the psychological effects of a whole generation. A large portion of the younger generation came up. They played video games. A lot of them were very violent video games, and so they were almost in their minds through the game. They were living in all kinds of, number one, dangerous situations, whether it be historical games or some kind of futuristic game or dystopic game. It's always conflict solving. It's always a problematic situation that they find themselves in, right? There's been a couple games where it's like, you just hang out in this world and you start mining stuff. And you look those. I mean, there's a niche who like that, but most people like the blowing up and the shooting and the the violent stuff. And I wonder if the sort of psychological well-being part isn't tapping into the effects of that. Where it's like, at one point it was just a video game, so you can enjoy, you can step in and it's almost like make believe. You can step in and enjoy and pretend you're this cool military ops guy and you got all this cool gadgetry and stuff like that. But you're fine because it's just a video game, And now it's like, oh, it's the real thing, and these people are, their soul, their mental health is very, very. What's the word I'm looking for? Amiable or fragile. It could be very fragile where they could break, and if they break and they get they have mental breakdowns and they have access to all this advanced technology, it could be a really bad situation. So I can understand sort of the military, the caution that they're approaching this with, but at the same time, it's pretty intense here. Quote, we select folks in SOCOM to be resilient, and sometimes there's an assumption that once we pick those resilient people, they're going to be resilient from here on out. Once they're good, said Army Lieutenant Colonel Amanda Robbins, command psychologist at U.S. Special Ops Command, or SOCOM. Quote, I think the challenge has been for the psychological domain and for that psychological support to be thought of as something that can aid performance, Colonel Robbins said at a panel discussion here. Quote, I think the next horizon is often going to be how do we get ahead of finding out where those emotional snowballs are coming from? How do we get ahead of taking that data and AI, that machine learning, and how do we incorporate that with the human element? Okay, so we are talking about prevention, a sort of emotional meltdown prevention program that requires emotional surveillance. And this is, on a very serious note with, we always joke around and have fun and stuff like that, but, it is a real thing happening. We've talked about it for so long that maybe, we're jaded. But to any friends and family who think this is all like nuts, we've seen sort of the psychological operation being deployed in many different fashions for years. But to have surveillance of, what you do, what websites you go to, what emails you have, what communications you might have with friends through text messages or, chat things, or what, that's one thing. Okay. The surveillance state, so to speak, exists already in those capacities, and maybe some cameras and audio equipment and stuff like that. But the level we're moving into now is way past that. It's not just, some text messages that you may have sent or some DMs or something. It's your emotions. It's your mind. And also your genetics. We'll get to it in the next story here. But let me finish up this one. Underlying that psychological analysis may be something even more elemental, Major General Thomas Solheim, Chief of Chaplains for the Army, said an individual's spirituality and finding ways to nurture it is the core principle upon which all other physical and psychological concepts are built. The other big point here, let me just finish this quote and then I'll make the point. Quote, it's really the docking station for everything else we're talking about, General Solheim told an audience here. Quote, now I think we're at another major inflection point. About 40 or 50, 45 years ago, we threw out the baby with the bathwater. We threw out religion and with it spirituality in an effort to be more inclusive as a people, not realizing the damage we inherently did to our culture as a result of that. I think this right here is why we are seeing the rise and really the mainstream push for the rise of Christian nationalism. We're having a repeat situation as we did in the 1940s and early 50s with Truman, with the Psychological Strategy Board, the PSB. And, he formulated a board before that, even in the 40s. Basically, the job was, hey, we have a very religious population in the U.S. It's post-war, all this kind of stuff, but we have this other threat. It's called communism. It's a threat to Western democracy. But we just came out of a war. We can't just like get everyone back into war, but we need something. So what they did was they basically weaponized the church, really, in the U.S. and radicalized a large population of people who were Christians, who were, good Christian people, good Christian communities. And it really was a true psychological operation to get them to both have, and you kind of hear these phrases, but they come from that era, a Bible in one hand and a rifle in the other kind of thing, where it's like, yeah, I'm a Christian and I'm going to defend my nation to death. And that sort of radicalization. And again, there is a noble aspect to this, but that's really the trap, right? Where you kind of get sucked into the nobility of it all and the honor of it all. And you don't realize that really while it is noble and honorable to serve and protect your country, it is also one of the biggest the biggest hijacks, the biggest sort of bait and switch that has happened with the elite in this country is to take the goodwill of those people and completely deceive them, and to provide reasons that are not for the betterment of the people that they're told they're defending, but really for the elite. And that's what's happened in this country. So we saw it with the radicalization. Really, it's funny because when they talk about 40 to 45 years ago, we threw the baby out with the bathwater. This is post, we came into this rise of secularism and this postmodernism and all this kind of stuff coming out of a hyper-religious time. We got the Jesus movement in the 70s. It's a kind of counter movement to the drug, sex, rock and roll movement. And, now looking back, it's like, man, they really just created these movements. These intel people were able to fuel and create large movements. And they're really good at it. The social engineering, they're fantastic at it. And so now that they let it go 40 to 50 years ago, and they had the rise of secularism, we had the rise of scientism, and we saw sort of the problems with that, and maybe the peak of all that in COVID, and showing the flaws and kind of exposing the problems if you just implement a society based on scientism. I specifically say scientism and not science. Scientism being sort of the religious, quasi-spiritual nature of the institution of science and medicine. And as a response, it's like a pendulum, as a response to the failing of that system, we need religion again. We need religion because it brings people together, and we need them to militarize again. So yeah, let's bring it back. We need a spiritual revival. And it may not be purely Christian. In fact, I think because of the nature of our country and how, there's a large Christian population in the U.S., but it's declining. There's a large population of secular people that consider themselves atheist or agnostic. And so, especially in like high levels of academia and things like that. So it makes sense. It's just this crazy pendulum that swings back and forth. And so the Christian nationalism topic embedded in this story about creating superhumans and the military being involved, it all seems like an operation. And especially, we talked about the trans-Maoism that Adam Curry brought up, and the number of people in the trans community who end up serving in the military as a sort of, so it's like they're creating the two separate teams at the same time right here in the U.S. to have a crazy civil war. You're going to have kind of your conservative enhanced cyborg warriors and your liberal trans cyborg warriors. And they're going to go at it, not just in the battlefield, but in their minds, which is kind of the crazy thing. It would be hilarious if you have these two factions meet, and then they come face to face, and they do it's kind of like a boxing match. You have your face off and your weigh in and everything beforehand. But then it's not a physical match. It's a metaverse thing. So, in physical world, they're just sitting there staring at each other. But in the metaverse world, it's explosions and large swords and humongous laser beams and, all that kind of stuff going on. And that'll determine, policy. Yeah, that's what's going to happen in the next iteration. Man, it really is a time when we need Jesus to return. How Jesus said, if he doesn't intervene, all flesh would be destroyed. It's like, yep, pretty much there, Jesus. We're getting there. Flesh destroying ourselves through all this stuff. Yep, we're there. Real quick here, since we're talking about, superhumans and transhumanism and the mind and everything else, I want to mention this. This is from massdevice.com. Paradromics raises, of course, $33 million. Wow, that is, it's incredible. It's quite incredible.
33 is the number of completion of the Great War.
Paradromics raises $33 million, wins FDA breakthrough nod for brain-computer interface tech. I like this article because it sort of identifies the players in the field. So it says here, Paradromics announced today that it raised $33 million in a Series A funding round that garnered an FDA breakthrough device designation. All right, so the fully demonic abomination, FDA, fully demonic abomination, has given Paradromics the green light, the honorable title of breakthrough device designation. Austin, Texas-based Paradromics develops a high data rate brain-computer interface. The company sees its latest financial and regulatory progress as a positive step into the competitive BCI market. Paradromics plans to use the funding to launch its first in-human clinical trial for the Connexus Direct Data Interface, DDI. Okay, and it talks about Connexus a little bit here, and it quotes the CEO. But here's what I wanted to point out. It's the different players. So Paradromics has been around for a while, having picked up a $7 million seed funding round in 2018. However, with the latest fundraising and an FDA hurdle cleared, the company looks to penetrate a market full of competition. Earlier this month, Cognition, we reported on this company, Cognition, put its hat in the ring, picking up a breakthrough nod for its flagship BCI technology. Cognition develops an assisted reality device designed to help people with severe motor impairments communicate and interact more effectively and independently. So we know about that. Oh, that's very nice. Very nice. Thank you. And then we also have BlackRock Neurotech. Remember that? We covered BlackRock several months ago. And they're in the game. Of course, we could not find a direct connection between BlackRock Neurotech and BlackRock, the hedge fund. But, come on. BlackRock Neurotech has been leading the way in the BCI space for multiple decades. The company develops the Neuroport Array neural interfacing system used in human BCI since 2004. So BlackRock has been in the game forever. Synchron comes into the market with the backing of the likes of investors such as Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos. That's right. Synchron, the Bill Gates-Bezos partnership for brain-computer interfaces. And then, of course, Elon Musk's Neuralink. So we have Neuralink, we have Synchron, we have BlackRock Neurotech, we have Cognition, and now we have Paradromics. It's like a royal rumble of brain-computer interfaces. And the FDA, the government has shown exception to Elon Musk. He's the monkeys and the morals and ethics and stuff like that. But through bureaucracy, these institutions like the FDA, the government is able to control who gets to play, basically, pay to play in a sense. So there you go. Just a quick, note on a company that maybe you want to put in your index of companies to track when it comes to the advancement and commercialization of this technology. And if you go to their Paradromics website here, paradromics.com, enabling the future in brackets. Weird. What if the brain were accessible to direct communication with computers, advanced sensors, or any digital device? Oh, okay, sure. Enabling brain data. The brain is a data organ. It needs a data interface. I mean, I don't know what to tell. It's no comment. It's self-explanatory, self-evident. The brain is a data organ. It needs a data interface. Don't we already have that in a sense? Is our own brains our own data interfaces? Why do we need more? Anyway, I just think it's interesting. All right. I did have this other article from Noble Magazine. And it's headline Reading the Mind with Machines, and we won't read it, but basically it's there's a term here that I don't think I've come across. It's called locked in patients. So the way they describe it, it's kind of like sleep paralysis, but it's more like a permanent thing where, your body kind of shuts down. You can't move. The only thing you can move is your eyes. And so, they're presenting the brain machine interfaces and sort of brain reading technology as a very important development and a place that needs a lot of funding for advancement because of the people who suffer from this locked in state. It reminded me also of I know, obscure reference, but there's a song called One by Metallica, and it's about a war veteran who comes back as a vegetable, in a vegetable state where he's conscious, but he can't see, he can't hear, he can't speak. He doesn't have any arms and legs. He's sort of trapped. His mind is awake, but he can't communicate or do anything. It reminds me of that. And of course, a perfect candidate for a brain machine interface so you can communicate with the outside world. Okay. So there you go. All the references are in the show notes at canarycrynewstalk.com. Let's move on though, because, this is all connected, and, we're going to talk about DNA for a moment.
'Cause I'm DNA.
Did you ever have the feeling that you were being watched?
So again, not just your activity on the internet or where you've been, but now we're tracking the mind, right? They want to track your emotions, your brain waves, all that. But I have dnyuz.com. Is that dnews.com? Headline here. Your DNA can now be pulled from thin air. Experts, privacy experts, that is, are worried. Okay, that doesn't sound good. David Duffy, a wildlife geneticist at the University of Florida, just wanted a better way to track disease in sea turtles. Then he started finding human DNA everywhere he looked. Over the last decade, wildlife researchers have refined techniques for recovering environmental DNA, or eDNA, trace amounts of genetic material that all living things leave behind. A powerful, inexpensive tool for ecologists, eDNA is all over, floating in the air or lingering in water, snow, honey, and even your cup of tea. Researchers have used the method to detect invasive species before they take over, to track vulnerable or secretive wildlife populations, and even to rediscover species thought to be extinct. The eDNA technology is also used in wastewater surveillance systems to monitor COVID and other pathogens.
We'll control them with toileting.
Called it.
Only us, folks. We're the only show. I'm pretty confident we are the only show. I made a big deal about the sewer surveillance. Right as the lockdowns were taking place, Israel was doing it. They were surveilling the sewage for COVID, and we thought, this is no good, man. This nobody's paying attention to it. Nobody wants to talk about it. This is a sort of like an easy back door to install all kinds of surveillance technology. And here we go. Now it's gone from, hey, sewer surveillance to, hey, guys, your DNA is everywhere. Is everywhere. And we can just pick it. We can take it. So it says here, but all along, scientists using eDNA were quietly recovering gobs and gobs of human DNA. Oh, gobs and gobs, huh? To them, it's pollution, a sort of human genomic bycatch, muddying their data. But what if someone set out to collect human eDNA on purpose? No kidding. You'd think this is already happening. New DNA collecting techniques are, quote, like catnip for law enforcement officials, says Aaron Murphy, a law professor at the New York University School of Law, who specializes in the use of new technologies in the criminal legal system. The police have been quick to embrace unproven tools like using DNA to create probability-based sketches of a suspect that could pose dilemmas for the preservation of privacy and civil liberties, especially as technological advancements allows more information to be gathered from ever smaller eDNA samples. Dr. Duffy and his colleagues used a readily available and affordable technology to see how much information they can glean from human DNA gathered from the environment in a variety of circumstances, such as from outdoor waterways and the air inside a building. The results of their research, published Monday in the journal Nature, Ecology, and Evolution, demonstrate that scientists can recover medical and ancestry information from minute fragments of human DNA lingering in an environment. Forensic ethicists and legal scholars say the Florida team's findings increase the urgency for comprehensive genetic privacy regulation. Oh, can you imagine? You get one question you get to ask our good President Joe Biden. He said, you got one question. Go ahead. Go ahead, Gons. Ask a question. President Joe, Mr. Hairy Legs, what are your thoughts on comprehensive genetic privacy regulation? Do you think it's important for people to have their own genetic privacy? What do you think he would say? Or maybe we go we go to someone younger who may know what we're talking about. We go to John Fetterman, Congressman John Fetterman. Say, hey, Congressman Fetterman, what are your thoughts on comprehensive genetic privacy regulation? What do you think he'd say? This is where we're at. This is crazy. For researchers, it also highlights an imbalance in rules around such techniques in the U.S., that it's easier for law enforcement officials to deploy a half-baked new technology than it is for scientific researchers to get approval for studies to confirm that the system even works. Yeah, this is something one of the Weinsteins was on Joe Rogan recently, and he was arguing about that. He was arguing that, why it was more in the context of UFO technology, but he was saying basically, why aren't the physicists the ones that are looking at the alleged information that we've gathered from high-level intel when it comes to this UFO UAP phenomenon? Why is it always, if we did have that technology, how come, we don't have a sort of a program that is covert or otherwise that, people working on it? We have the Manhattan Project. He brings up the Manhattan Project as an example. And so, and he suggests, what was it? One of the New York universities as maybe one that is working on this type of, futuristic anti-gravitic technology of sorts. But who knows? Highly compartmentalized technology, and I'm sure this already exists. But this article goes on and on and on about this DNA thing and surveillance. We don't have to get into it. I recommend you read it for yourself if you really want to get the full lowdown. But it's just one of those things where the things that we, at least our generation when we were growing up, were taught as central to the U.S. in principle, things like the Bill of Rights and the Constitution. These things have never been as challenged as they have now with technology, and it'll be very interesting to see how society continues to evolve. I'm using the term evolve in the sort of transhuman sense, as the technologies integrate with traditional forms of governance, traditional forms of, or traditional philosophies for social interaction, social stability, social status. And it involves seeing what happens with your mind and your emotions and also your DNA. And well, I wonder what kind of privacy rights you can get, like what happens if the problem, again, it's being in terms of the problem reaction solution, the solution here is that each individual take a hold of their own genetic data. It's already downstairs. You got to bring it up here. I'll do it for you. Or I'll write it down on a piece of paper. Okay. All right. Bring a piece of paper. I'll write it down for you. Okay. Sorry about that. Yeah. Okay. There you go. I had some other points here, but been rambling on and on for too long anyway. Okay. Let's move on here. I wanted to mention this as maybe part of the beast system.
Speaking of the beast system, beast system.
And it has to do with some technology because, with all this data incoming, right? Brainwave data, genetic data, emotional data, we don't have enough computer space to house all that. How are we going to do that? Yes. It's not cursive, it's lowercase. It's regular lowercase writing. Okay. Yeah, so how are we going to store that? So I came across this article. It's from last year, but I thought it was kind of interesting, especially given the conversation we just had about D-Wave last episode with Gordy Rose, or Jordy Rose. I don't know. And the headline here from technews.am, world's first portable quantum computers on sale in Japan. Prices start at $8,700. Okay. All right. And the world's first portable quantum computers, Gemini Mini, Gemini, and Triangulum, developed by the Chinese company SpinQ Technology, are on sale in Japan. The price for the simplest Gemini Mini 2 qubit system starts at $8,700, while the most expensive model of the three will cost about $58,000. Yeah, there's on sale in Japan for all those hermits in Japan to, they don't need cars. So they don't need to spend their 60 grand on cars. They're going to spend it on the portable quantum computers, the Gemini Mini 2 qubit system. According to the Japanese portal PC Watch, in the past, SpinQ Technology supplied its 2 qubit quantum systems to educational institutions in China, Taiwan, and Canada, where students can learn the principles of programming on quantum systems on these devices. Now anyone can buy such a device. Now I have a story about China in a moment, but I think this gives it away here. If we're talking about the future of computing, and we're talking about the people who are going to be manufacturing the microchips for the future of computing, Taiwan. And China is, they roll out this 2 qubit quantum system and they provide it to educational institutions in Taiwan. Hello. Get in there, China, I feel these are indicators that the U.S. is not going to win the Taiwan situation, that China has already planted enough roots to actually either maintain this sort of ambiguous type of thing or just fully take over. So we'll get to that in a moment here, but I think this is a subtle thing that's important to recognize. And also, I think we heard, who was it? Was it Soros or was it? No, it wasn't Soros. It was, one of the big hedge fund guys. I forget his name. He's one of these big billionaire hedge fund rich guys. Had all the stock in the Taiwanese, the computer chip company. He dumped all of his stock, his shares in that company. And he said it was over geopolitical concerns. So, yeah, not looking good for the U.S. But in any case, I didn't know that there was already a quantum computing system commercially available. SpinQ, the Triangulum. I wonder how well it works. I like how it's hey, quantum computers. How does it work? What is it? These people don't even know what it is, but they're selling it for $9,000. You can have your first quantum computer. So there you go. I did not realize that we are already at the point where we have technology, commercial technology that allegedly operates off of qubits rather than your typical ones and zeros. And yeah, so coding in quantum and AI in quantum. These things are going to be quantum. It will be like AI, like the way AI just kind of we have been talking about it forever, but a product comes out and then boom, everyone's talking about AI, and the AI is the whole shebang. The same thing will happen with quantum. We've been talking about quantum, but all of a sudden somebody will put out a product and then boom, everyone will be talking about quantum. It's just how it works. It's how it works. So I just want to make you aware of the Gemini Mini. For those of you interested in grabbing a quantum computer, there you go. You got the Spin Q made in China. I'm sure they're not collecting any data from the alternative universe that you tap into with the quantum computers. Which, again, leads us into a conversation about China. Got a couple articles here. This one is from The Telegraph, UK. China is preparing for war, and the West is preparing to surrender. The point I just made. Too few are willing to accept that Beijing is up to and its readiness to attack democratic Taiwan. Yeah, I think that's it. Now, there's a Liz Truss thing that happens here.
Liz Truss, the unknown one.
You guys remember Liz Truss? She was the shortest prime minister, and I don't mean that by height, but I mean that by service. She got in, she was the new one, the new prime minister, replacing Boris, and then I think it was like 3 months maybe. And she's like, nah, not for me. So they follow Liz Truss here because she went to Taiwan to talk with the Taiwanese government. And let's skip to this paragraph here. China and the long-term challenges Beijing poses to Britain's well-being, of course, this is the Telegraph here, so they're Britain-focused, was another issue that was a central feature to Truss's global outlook, utterly refuting the Cameron Osborne vision of establishing a new golden era in relations with Beijing. She wanted to make a declaration to the effect that China constituted a quote-unquote threat to Britain's national security. She maintained this stance after becoming prime minister, even going so far as to call for the formation of an economic NATO to counter Beijing's financial might. Now, I think that is where we're going to get the Canton network. Remember? Goldman Sachs, Microsoft, Cboe, and Deloitte with our own blockchain. We have our own blockchain. I don't know why it's British, but I guess we're talking about the Telegraph. But yeah, those companies coming together, they're creating their own blockchain. I mean, it's just another iterations before you have an economic NATO to fight against Beijing's financial might. Hello. So, okay. Warning that China aims to use its global economic clout to gain dominance while undertaking the biggest military buildup in peacetime history. She called on the Western Alliance, quote, to do all we can to support free democracies like Taiwan in the face of aggression from a Chinese regime whose records we already know, end quote. A reference to Beijing's brutal suppression of democracy in Hong Kong. Oh, I thought they were talking about the Uyghurs. But, all right, yeah, sure. The Hong Kong thing, too. Yeah, both. And she laid down a challenge to Rishi Sunak, Stanford, who is visiting Japan for a G7 summit, to follow her lead in denouncing China as a threat to British security. Doubling down this anti-China thing. Then it mentions Nancy Pelosi. But while critics will argue that her visit has been deliberately timed to upstage Sunak's presence in the region, her assessment of the threat Beijing poses to both Taiwan's future independence as well as the wider world deserves serious consideration. All right. It says here, China, let me just, U.S. intelligences claiming that Chinese military will be ready to annex Taiwan by 2027, The new AUKUS alliance has a lot of catching up to do if it is to pose a credible counterbalance to Chinese military expansion. Certainly, there can be little question that Beijing is preparing itself for a major conflict, perhaps even against the West. So they're basically saying China is well prepared for the takeover of Taiwan, and the winner of Taiwan gets to sort of set the tone for the next, I don't know, wave or next generations of innovation and industry. And at the very end here, they have some suggestions. One good way for Britain to show it is serious about holding Beijing to account would be to use its forthcoming membership of the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, CPTPP, to block China from obtaining membership and propose that Taiwan joins the trade pact instead. Ah, yes, good old backhanded, passive-aggressive bureaucracy. That would send a clear signal to Beijing that the West is not going to tolerate any attempt by China to meddle with Taiwan's sovereignty, which I thought was hilarious because they go, the article, we didn't go through the whole thing, but they go on and on about how the Chinese military have been preparing. They're getting ready for a physical altercation. They're ready for combat. They've been preparing for this thing. And then the response, what can UK do? What can the British do? Is not, we should also ramp up our military. No, theirs is, let's form an organization and then ban them from joining the organization. I mean, it's just, yeah. This is why I think China is going to dominate the next few decades. I'm sorry, folks. I'm sorry to be so pessimistic, but yeah, I could see it happening is all I'll say, because, the Western sort of mindset is, sanctions and paperwork and documentation, and China's stance is like, we got super soldiers over here. We got then the Russians have the Scythian. They resurrected the Scythian tribes, so we got the super soldier Scythians in Russia. We got our, the ancient Mongolian resurrection of super soldiers here in China. Yeah, we want war, America, or UK. UK is probably like, oh, America, unleash your super soldiers, help us. But there you go. That's a little thing on China and the sentiment, I guess, that the West is in trouble, that that China is really winning. they're winning in sort of the Cold War, so to speak. And that leads to this story. This is part 3, the Batlands. This is a Reuters special investigative report. And the headline is China, birthplace of the COVID pandemic, is laying tracks for another global health crisis. Which is hilarious because, China has been working on their Belt and Road for a long time. And part of the reason was to be the railroads, literally, for commerce, for trade, for import-export, and really facilitate the movement of, goods. And, every industrialized nation, anytime they develop on land, they cut down trees, they plow the land, they do things to the geography to make it happen. So, you can't just say China's so bad and horrible because they're doing that, which is part of the argument in this report, is that, China, they're burning through, traditional or, forests and blah, blah, blah. It's kind of the same sort of thing we've heard from the eco warriors in the past. Real briefly here, this article is a very long one. They have these kind of, blocks at the beginning that have little spiels in them. Built to speed the export of commodities to China, the rail link runs rapidly parallel to a new superhighway. And, that's talking about the China-Laos Railway. Development and tourism already are accelerating along the routes, and Scientists warn, increasing the risk that a new pandemic pathogen will emerge from a remote place in a world more interconnected than ever. So their whole thing is scientists are saying that these new roads might cause the next pandemic. And then they talk about how there's like bat populations and like wild bats in Laos, and it's part of their diet. And, you know, this could be just like COVID happened with the bats. Now China's making railroads all over the eastern continents and, to trade with China. And they might cause the next pandemic because bats that can have super COVID might move around or whatever. It's just so interesting how it's, they build on that false premise of the whole wet market narrative. And they're just like fear mongering now, And this is not to defend China, not defending China. I don't want you to mistake that. I am saying that, because we are in a economic and resource war with China that we are losing. I can see how, especially in the West, the news outlets and media agencies are going to do whatever they can to, paint China and everything they do as negative and evil and horrible, which is hilarious. If you've been around for a while, it's kind of the same thing. It's the same arguments that the left, eco-warrior, progressives, and all that kind of stuff, the green people or whatever. It's the same kind of arguments that they've been arguing against Western, corporatism or capitalism. You hear that very often from that side of the aisle. It's like, oh, capitalism, the corruption of capitalism. Oh, that's all they do is they destroy nature and it could cause a pandemic and all this kind of stuff. All the same arguments, just plow it on to China. But they're communists. So how does that work? You have to either admit that the capitalism that you're talking about isn't quite that. It's actually more like communism, which it is. Or you have to admit that China is not as, in this particular situation, the threat isn't as serious as they're making it sound. And Reuters goes on, it's just right a lot. They spent a lot of money, time, and effort on this report. And I'll read this little highlight. In a 2019 paper, the World Bank analyzed possible environmental impacts of China's Belt and Road Initiative. The Laos Railway, with a cost of $6 billion, is just one of an estimate $1 trillion in projects, including more than 3,100 kilometers of railway to 12,000 kilometers in roads that Beijing are set out to build in more than 80 countries. So, man, the economic rails are already starting to take place with everybody dumping the dollar for the yuan to trade with China. And, of course, the infrastructure's there. The Belt and Road has been ongoing. And so, again, I feel like we're losing this war. In some ways, it's a war of attrition, but it's really about manufacturing. And there was a very interesting chart that Bajali, I think that's how you say his name, Balaji, I think it's Balaji maybe, Balaji, former Coinbase CTO, I believe. And, he comments on economic stuff, but he's kind of he's a billionaire, I think. So he's, it's I don't know. He's got his own views. He said Bitcoin's going to be worth $1 million in 90 days. He said that about 3 months ago. And I think he lost the bet. I think he paid the $1 million. It's like, dude, use $1 million for something a little better. His whole thing was like, I'm raising awareness about the problems with our economy. It's like, yeah, you could definitely have done something else with $1 million to provide that exact same message or awareness. But anyway, beside the point, he did post this chart, which I thought was very interesting. It's the 50 global steel production, 50 years of global steel production visualized. And if you take a close look at this chart, he says that it's hard to fight your factory. That's his commentary. And of course, it's a graph. So, so you got your timeline from left to right. It starts in 1965 and it ends in 2020. And it shows in sort of a bubble form, I guess, the amount of steel being produced per nation, per country, or at least the biggest ones. And so back in 1965, you have China is barely even there. China's not doing anything. Europe is producing the most amount of steel, and then USSR in the US, and then Japan is up there, and then a smattering of Asian and Indian nations, or I guess India is a nation in itself. But so, yeah, it's mainly Europe, US, USSR, and Japan doing the steel production. But that begins to change in 1993. China overtook U.S. steel production and took Japan's place as the top producer in 1996. And from that point on, I mean, China has exploded in steel production. Now, at least at this chart goes to 2022, China is the dominant nation producing steel to the tune